Imagine a Pokemon game that defied conventions, a world with no gyms, no Pokemon League, just a captivating experience filled with stunning visuals, a new story, region, and unique quests where your choices change the outcome of the game. One that promised to redefine what a fan game could achieve. This game wasn't just a nostalgic nod to 2D, it was a masterpiece of innovation. Quests replaced the traditional gym battles, creating a journey filled with depth and charm which showcased what Pokemon games could have been had they taken a different path. But despite its promise, Phoenix Rising was a dream that remained unfulfilled. The project unfortunately was abandoned after its first chapter, leaving fans with a tantalizing glimpse of what could have been the best fan game ever. This is the story of Pokemon Phoenix Rising. When you open up the game, you can choose from 2 new characters to play as before you embark on your journey in the Hawthorne region. The opening cutscene itself gives you a little taste of what you're about to dive into. I mean, the graphics and art style are very charming and are kind of reminiscent of the Gen 4 Pokemon games. Within moments of starting the game, you're introduced to the quest system, and I think it's pretty surprising that the official Pokemon games never implemented something like this. While those games have clear objectives and optional side stuff, the main difference here is that your progress is always documented, which is a subtle but significant improvement in quality of life. You don't get the annoying handholding the Generation 7 games does to you, and it still saves you from the trouble of having to recall your progress and objectives. This system also motivated me to talk to every NPC to actively seek out every quest that I can possibly get. The main quests are related to the story and have to be done to progress in the game. What's cool is that some of them allow the player to have different moral choices in how they want their story and character to shape up, and this impacts the dialogue and rewards that they will receive. One example of this in the game was allowing a thief to escape in exchange for a nugget, or turning him into the cops and potentially getting nothing at all. I mean, this may seem like nothing at all, but who knows, maybe later in the story that same thief shows up again if you decide to let him get away, but having those choices to begin with adds a whole new dimension to what is already an enjoyable experience. Meanwhile, the side quests are things that you can do in your own time. Some examples were a string of riddles that you had to solve, finding the Name Raiders glasses to get the Wise Glasses, which is a held item, and finding hidden and rare Pokemon. When it comes to the kinds of Pokemon you'll meet along the way, this game decided to be bold and take a different approach. The star Pokemon itself are a unique choice, with them being Peddle, Growlithe, and Staryu. Growlithe obviously wins out on popularity here, but the reason these 3 were chosen in specific is that of course they're pure grass, fire, and water types, but also the fact that they each evolve with an evolution stone. This was meant to show the emphasis of choice-based gameplay in Pokemon Phoenix Rising, and eventually they were meant to Mega Evolve as well, but we just never got the chance to see that. Even if you may not like these set of starters, you can find some fan favorites roaming around in the wild. I mean, you hear rumors of a rare fighting type that is rarely seen in trad form, and it is none other than Riolu. On the second route, you can get your hands on Eevee, which you can evolve into a Jolteon with a Thunderstone that you can buy from the shop in between routes, or Espeon and Umbreon using the Soothe Bell to raise happiness, or even decide to evolve it into a Leafeon like I did in Timber Woods. Again, this is some pretty heavy choice-based stuff about 2 to 3 hours in the game. You can also rarely find a Larvitar egg and other Pokemon like Pikachu, Scyther, and Ghastly among 200 other Pokemon, so there are plenty of options. What makes this game special is that this was around the time of Sun and Moon, which had introduced Alolan forms. This game came up with its own set of regionals called Relic forms that brought existing Pokemon back with a fresh new look, typing, and stats. Nowadays, the idea of alternate forms may seem pretty basic, but back then it was still something fascinating. These relic forms were so much harder to find, which added so much more value to them when comparing them to something like an Alolan Rattata. The Pokemon that had these relic forms were Badoo, Spinda, Coughing, Flabebe, Skiddo, Apom, Scraggy, Tentacool, and Ledeba. Now they might not sound like a popular bunch, but that's kinda the point. These alternate forms should be given to Pokemon who aren't as usable, and just by seeing some of this artwork, they look phenomenal. The reason why they were called Relic Pokemon is because the story of this game is based on a war in the Hawthorne region, involving oracles, kings and queens and some medieval aspects. But since this game is only 6 to 7 hours long, you don't really get to hear much about that. At one point you meet an oracle at an ancient temple, and this is where you get your first Relic Pokemon. And later on you enter this town with a museum, and you find a group protecting the queen. And that's about it. And that's actually where the game ends, so I can't really say anything about the story. Now let's talk a little bit about the region and map. Each city and route has a strong aura as the ambience and decorations make each one unique. So just a few examples. Tranquilo Town loves their farming and has these lanterns that light up during the night, and just north of there is Trad Farm that has buildings like a silo, a barn for their milk tank, and a well that really sets the atmosphere. Timber Woods is surrounded by these giant trees that allow just a little bit of sunlight shining through. And along a bridge you find a pack of Teddiursa and an Ursaring towering over you. Then to the west is Sonata Town, which seems a little bit more refined with the way the architecture is. They have some street lighting and a fine dining restaurant, but what you hear around town are ghost stories. The only way out is through a swamp which has an old abandoned factory, which ties in really well with those ghost stories. Then Excello Village has these uplifted wooden platforms to try and make the best of living in a swampy area, and the greenery here is completely different from what we've seen before. The Pokemart and Pokecenter also make use of the forestry inside, and it makes it feel so natural. Some of the other features this game was going to provide was a clothing store that would be available in every Pokemart, which would allow you to customize your character. We all know that this is always a popular feature, and getting something like this in a fan game would have been amazing. You should have also noticed by now that Pokemon follow you, which is always nice, especially since the only games that did this were Heart Gold and Soul Silver at the time. When it came to battling, you also had the option of changing the speed from ×1 all the way down to 3. And this is actually a very important thing in modern fan games, as people don't have the attention span to be sitting there and going through every turn at normal speed anymore. I mean, I can certainly feel the pain when battles are going at a snail's pace, so having this back in 2018 was great. During the game, you get something called the Pokestrap, which is almost like the Pokédex from Diamond and Pearl. It allows you to look at the condition of your Pokemon and easily swap the member you want following you around. On top of that, it also came with a dowsing machine feature to find hidden items, and also a step counter in case you're trying to hatch Pokemon. Besides the setting, quest log, and bag, there was also a tutorial section in case you ever forgot how something functioned, and I feel like the GUI is something that should be appreciated. They made it look different, but it was still very clean and simple to use. With all these features combined, it's easy to say that this very well could have been one of the best fan games ever made, especially since we didn't even get to see a shred of the story, and combining all that with the quests where you could potentially change the outcome of the game could have been a whole new experience for a Pokemon game. But sadly, this will probably never come to light considering the fact that Relic Castle got taken down by the Pokemon Company, so the devs of the game may be too afraid of what might happen in the future. I mean, this was an incredible passion project made by the Phoenix Rising team, even though it lasted only a short time. That's all I have to say about this game, so if you enjoyed the video, I would love it if you considered subscribing, as it helps me out a ton. And that's it from me. I'll see you guys next time.